in Cape Town. A councillor is accusing lobby group Ndifuna Ukwazi of holding residents hostage. This after the group took the city to court over a clean-up operation in parts of the city where homeless people live. Ndifuna Ukwazi believes the city is targeting the homeless. To discuss this further, we're joined by Mpho Raboeane from Ndifuna Ukwazi's Law Centre. Mpho, good morning and thank you very much for your time. Now, as I said in that intro, you've been accused of holding law-abiding citizens hostage for your latest court bid on the city's treatment of the homeless people. But before you respond to that particular statement of holding them hostage, can you just take us through that which concerns you on the streets and waste bylaws?
All right. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. So, Ndifuna Ukwazi recently launched court proceedings against the city of Cape Town. And what we're challenging is the constitutionality of its amendments to the streets, public places, and noise nuisances bylaws. So at the heart of this challenge is that the bylaw discriminates against those who find themselves in a precarious socio-economic position, specifically the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution that this amendment offends against are your rights of equality, security of person, freedom of movement, access to adequate housing, and the right to life, essentially. Because what this bylaw does is it criminalizes poverty. And the fact that one cannot afford adequate shelter for themselves or their family, and for whatever reasons may find themselves on the streets, the bylaw intends to criminalize such persons and so doing, thrust them into a criminal justice system that only serves to perpetuate the poverty and inequality faced by these individuals and not necessarily remedy the situation by integrating them into the economy, by making sure that they become productive citizens of the society.
You know, Mpho, it's interesting that you say that, because the city, on the other hand, in its response, it says that the amendments are actually meant to decriminalize perhaps the sleeping or camping in public spaces if no alternative space is offered. So some just listening to that response could easily think, oh, well, that is progressive. They're saying it will only be a criminal offense if we have given you an alternative place to stay, but you refused. If we haven't and we find you on the streets, then it cannot be an offense because you have nowhere. We haven't given you an alternative. So what do you make of those that would think, but surely they're being progressive in their approach to homelessness now?
I think this point needs to be clarified because in as much as it seems progressive, we must bear in mind that the resources that are offered as alternative accommodation in terms of this bylaw are actually quite limited. Now, before 2020, there was a study completed that found that over 14,000 people are experiencing homelessness in the city of Cape Town, and 50% of that number is experiencing chronic homelessness. So the solution offered by the city at this point, by combining both a law enforcement and a shelter solution to the issue, is short-sighted in as far as it compels people to take up shelter space as offered by the city without taking into consideration that shelter provision or the accommodation provided by shelters is limited in that you can only stay for a maximum of 6 months. Some shelter require payments for the duration of your stay at that shelter. And currently, the city of Cape Town can only provide under 3,000 shelter beds, around 2,500 shelter beds, whereas we're looking at well over 14,000 individuals facing homelessness.
But surely
so
now that
the disparity in those numbers.
Apologies for interjecting there, but surely then that becomes their burden, because they've said they cannot find this to be an offense if they have not given you proper shelter. So meaning it becomes a burden on them that they're willing to take. That if we come across a homeless person, we will offer them an alternative. If we cannot, if the space is limited, we cannot be sending this person to prison or anything or fining them in any way. So is that, like I say, not the route to take, where you don't just find this an offence, you provide an alternative?
Right, so the extent of this approach is limited in as far as it does not address the chronic homelessness situation and the causes thereof. So if you're looking for a long-term solution that will ensure that people don't undergo the cycle of going through shelters and ending up on the streets once more, you would need to invest in social development interventions, and you would need to invest in interventions such as Housing First, which centralizes the provision of permanent accommodation and provides a base for people experiencing homelessness to rebuild their life and integrate themselves back into society. So if you are going to proceed with the current approach, which is currently costing City of Cape Town ratepayers over 744 million a year, right? So to continue with a law enforcement first response that penalizes your presence in a public place because of your specific circumstances and because you're experiencing poverty is not a solution that is sustainable. And going back to your point about this essentially then being a burden on the city for them to address the issue, in practice, this is not so. Because in practice, it is the law enforcement officials that harass people experiencing homelessness. So despite the fact that they do not have the alternative offered to them, they still experience inordinate harassment and over-policing, and invariably end up in prisons and going through the criminal justice system. So policy and practice here do not meet. But essentially what we are saying is that the provisions of the bylaw as it stands are unconstitutional in as far as they unfairly discriminate against a subset of society that finds themselves in this position due to socioeconomic circumstances. And it is actually the city and national government that should be prioritizing access to adequate housing as per the Section 26 constitutional right, because it is the lack of access to adequate, affordable housing that has led us to the situation where there are inordinate amount of people who find themselves without shelter.
Has the city perhaps not engaged you and maybe taken you through a comprehensive plan to deal with homelessness? Because according to reports, they are looking to avail or release more land to address this problem holistically. And I know there's been a report where the mayor was quoted as saying he's looking to change the city's approach to law enforcement to that of a caring or more compassionate type of approach. Are you not sold on that? At least that they're looking to change?
So in looking to change, you would also need to look at the other side or look at what the other hand is doing. So in terms of conduct, we have yet to see this caring approach being implemented on the streets by these law enforcement officials, or we have yet to see a situation where the approach is actually led by a social development interference or initiative that will progressively then assist persons with access to social services so that they can rebuild their lives. And as far as recalibrating their approach or relooking at this law enforcement approach that the city is currently using, we are hopeful that the city is indeed genuine in what it says about wanting to prioritize a caring approach. And in so doing, we are very open to engaging in different solutions and different approaches that we have seen work in other jurisdictions across the world, where, as I said before, housing is centralized as a base for all other activities to occur and for such individuals to be successfully integrated and to escape the cycle of being chronically homeless.
Now, just before I let you go, there's this age-old debate. Right now, we've got them on the streets. Which would be better, to help them while they are on the streets or to take them out? Because I know the city is of the view that we need to get them off the street, while others say help them while they are there in the interim.
Right. So I think what we need to clarify here is that Ndifuna Ukwazi is not advocating for people who are experiencing homelessness to remain indefinitely on the streets. We understand that this is a situation that they do not want themselves. So in remedying such a situation, we are emphasizing, or we are saying that long-term interventions are going to be the most sustainable and the most successful, as we've seen in other places across the world. And in implementing those long-term solutions, the most practical approach would be an incremental one, where you first assist persons with their immediate needs, because people experiencing homelessness, for example, struggle to access social services because they have lost their IDs due to a myriad of raids conducted by law enforcement or the police. So addressing issues like that and meeting persons where they are with the specific needs that they are having at that point in time, and then implementing an incremental approach to securing people's integration back into society and back into a housed environment should be prioritized instead of this approach of erasure, because removing people off the street does not necessarily address the issues that got them there in the first place. Removing people off the street is actually just erasing any reminder of poverty. And the city of Cape Town is adamantly against any sign of poverty or keeps treating its poor as a defect, whereas it should be addressing the actual poverty and inequality that results in people finding themselves on the street with no other alternative.